15 minutes before I walked down the aisle, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. She wasn't calling to give her blessing. Her voice was flat, piping cold through the speaker. "Your father is busy voting. He said he will never sacrifice his political career to show up at some impulsive, low-class wedding to a grease monkey." I've pulled my guys out of a burning armored vehicle, but in that moment, I froze. To my powerful DC family, a soldier who pays her dues in blood was still just a stain they needed to hide. But they had no idea who was sitting in the front row of my little chapel that day. The photo I sent them afterward made them call me back frantically and relentlessly. But before I reveal what that picture showed, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button to follow the rest of this story. The echo of her words hung in the stale air of the holding room. My grip on the phone tightened. I squeezed the device until my knuckles turned a sickly bone white. The hard plastic edge dug deep into my palm. A civilian daughter might have screamed. She might have thrown the phone at the wall, completely ruined her mascara, or begged for a miserable scrap of validation. Not me. I am 82nd Airborne. My survival instinct doesn't allow for breakdowns. It builds walls, concrete 10 feet thick. When the enemy starts screaming, you don't scream back. You freeze them out. I stared straight ahead at the peeling paint on the chapel wall. The room smelled like musty, rotting pine floorboards and dust. My chest stopped heaving. I took the pain, locked it in a mental steel box, and threw away the key. "I understand," I said. Two dry, hollow words. No emotion, no tremor. I didn't wait for her to respond. Click. I tossed the phone into my canvas duffel bag on the floor. That was it. The umbilical cord wasn't just cut, it was cauterized. A heavy knock rattled the thin wooden door. It swung open, the rusted hinges whining. I didn't look up expecting to see my father. Senator Richard Mayer didn't do places with chipped paint and unpaved gravel parking lots. Standing in the doorway wasn't a politician in a custom-tailored Brioni suit. It was Captain Hayes. His dress blues were crisp, the airborne patch sharp against the dark fabric. Silver paratrooper wings gleamed under the cheap, buzzing fluorescent bulb. He didn't offer some bullshit, pitying apology for my blood relatives. He didn't have to. He just extended a thick, calloused arm. "Ready to jump, Sergeant?" he asked. His voice was a low, steady gravel. I nodded, slipping my arm through his. We stepped out of the holding room together. The narrow hallway was packed. Not with DC socialites holding crystal champagne flutes, but with my squad. Guys with high and tight haircuts smelling of cheap aftershave and boot polish. Eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Lieutenant Foster threw me a slow wink. Private Miller held the heavy oak chapel doors open. They laughed, a loud booming sound that bounced off the wooden rafters. Metals clinked. Heavy leather boots scuffed the hardwood floor. This was my chosen family. They bled for each other in the dirt, not for profit margins or polling numbers in an air-conditioned office. They stepped right up and filled the rotting void my parents left behind, packing it tight with blind loyalty. 2 hours later, the reception was in full swing. Fayetteville in late spring meant heat and humidity you could chew. There were no towering ice sculptures, no string quartets playing classical garbage, just a rusted oil drum smoker out back kicking out thick hickory smoke, sweating bottles of local IPA, and the heavy smell of roasting BBQ ribs. The hem of my white dress was already caked in dry dirt, and I didn't give a damn. I leaned against a splintered wooden picnic table, watching the chaos. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. It was time. I didn't need to yell to get their attention. "Ethan, Cap, you two, Uncle Dan." I called out over the loud music. Ethan wiped his hands on a greasy red shop rag and jogged over. Hayes fell in line. And then there was Daniel, my father's younger brother. He stood out in his worn elbow-patch tweed jacket. He looked out of place among the buzz cuts and sleeve tattoos, but he was standing taller than I'd seen him in years. We squeezed together. Ethan's arm still smelling faintly of WD-40 and sweat wrapped tight around my waist. I held the phone up. Snap. I opened my messages and clicked on the Mayer family group chat. The screen was choked with unread messages from my father's PR team sending links about his latest legislative victory. I attached the photo. I didn't type a single letter. No caption. No, wish you were here. No, look at me. I just hit send. A silent, armor-piercing round fired straight into the heart of Chevy Chase, Maryland. 3 minutes. That's exactly how long it took for the shockwave to hit. My phone, resting face up on the picnic table, vibrated. A harsh, grinding buzz against the wood grain. The screen lit up. Mother. I didn't touch it. I just watched it shake. It stopped, then immediately started convulsing again. Senator Richard Mayer. He never called from his personal number. Never. The phone vibrated so hard it started inching toward the edge of the table. The calls came in like a rapid-fire assault. A relentless, panicked digital scream. They saw the picture. They saw the dirt backyard. But more importantly, they saw the man in the tweed jacket. The man my father had ruthlessly erased from the world 30 years ago. Ethan walked over carrying 2 cold beers. He looked down at the flashing screen, then looked up at me. His hands were rough. His knuckles were permanently stained with motor oil and deep-set grease. The exact hands of a man my father called low class. Ethan didn't say a word. He set a beer down, picked up the buzzing phone, and pressed his grease-stained thumb hard against the power button. The screen went dead. Pitch black. The silence that followed was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. To understand how I could watch that phone screen go black without a single flinch, you have to look at the map of scars they spent years carving into me. My ability to freeze people out wasn't born in the military. It was forged in the halls of my own house. Let's rewind. I was 14. I remember standing in the doorway of my mother's master bedroom. My chest was heaving. My father had just finished tearing me apart downstairs over a B+ on a history paper, calling me a lazy liability. I looked at my mother, desperate for a lifeline. "Why don't you ever defend me?" I asked. My voice cracked. She sat at her massive oak vanity. She didn't even look at me through the mirror. Her hands moved with a sickening, practiced calmness. She reached behind her neck and unclasped her heavy pearl necklace. Click. She coiled the pearls, slowly letting them drop into a velvet box. The sound of the hard spheres hitting the fabric was the only noise in the room. "Keep your voice down, Nola," she sighed, rubbing a dab of expensive cream into her neck. "This family needs peace." Her peace. Bought and paid for with my silence. I realized right then that my mother wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice hiding behind a string of pearls. 2 years later, I tried a different tactic. Achievement. I was 16 when I dragged a massive heavy-bottomed state science championship trophy through our front door. My hands were shaking. I had spent 6 months sleeping 4 hours a night to build that robotics project. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I walked into the den. My father was standing at his custom wet bar. The heavy scent of aged scotch and expensive leather furniture hung in the air. He poured his drink. 2 ice cubes. The crystal glass clinked. I set the trophy on the coffee table. Thud. He didn't put his drink down. He barely glanced at the blue ribbon. "Good," he said, taking a slow sip. His eyes dragged over my oversized sweater and messy ponytail. "But Claire just made captain of the cheer squad. That builds real connections. No one cares about wires and metal, Nola. They care about who you know." My sister Claire? The golden child. She walked in, right on cue, spinning a plastic pom-pom around her finger, wearing a smug little smirk. My intellect? My 6 months of blood and sweat was absolute garbage. Her short skirt and blonde hair were the only currency that mattered in the Mayer house. They didn't just ignore me, they weaponized her against me. But the real torture didn't happen at home. It happened in public, specifically at the Chevy Chase Country Club. Dinner there was never about the food. It was a deposition, an interrogation room disguised with stiff white tablecloths and crystal chandeliers. We sat at a corner booth. The room was loud with the hum of DC elites networking, but our table was suffocatingly quiet. My father didn't yell in public. He used something worse, the glare. He would fire off questions. Politics, macroeconomics, things a teenager shouldn't have to debate over a breadbasket. If I stuttered, if I paused for a fraction of a second to find the right word, he didn't correct me. He just stopped chewing. He would lock his pale eyes onto mine and stare. A cold, dead reptilian gaze that pinned me to the expensive leather booth. The silence would stretch. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The scraping of heavy silver forks against bone china sounded like nails on a chalkboard. I picked up my spoon. I swallowed the $30 lobster bisque. It was thick and rich, but in my mouth it tasted like wet sawdust. It tasted like failure. I kept my back military straight, choking down the food while his eyes stripped away every ounce of my self-worth. I learned to stop talking. I learned to stop feeling. I learned to survive by becoming invisible. But invisibility only lasts so long before you suffocate. I turned 18. I didn't apply to the Ivy League schools he demanded. I didn't ask for his money. It was a Tuesday evening. The sky outside was a bruised, ugly purple. Rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his mahogany-paneled office. I walked in. I didn't knock. He looked up from his paperwork, irritated. I walked straight to his desk and dropped a single stack of papers right over his legislative drafts. Army enlistment forms, signed, sealed, done. He looked at the military logo. The skin around his mouth went tight. The red color crept up his neck, crawling into his cheeks. "What is this trash?" he hissed. "My way out," I said. My voice didn't shake. Not even a fraction. He stood up. The heavy leather chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. Before I could blink, he swung his arm. Smack. A blinding flash of white light exploded behind my eyes. The sharp, stinging heat spread across my left cheek. The force of the slap snapped my head to the side. My jaw clicked. A hot metallic taste flooded my mouth. I bit the inside of my cheek. "You are a delusional, low-class disappointment." He roared, the spit flying from his lips. "You are nothing without this family." I stood there. I tasted the blood. I didn't raise my hand to touch my cheek. I didn't flinch. I just slowly turned my head back and looked him dead in the eyes. I saw the monster. I saw the small, pathetic tyrant hiding behind a suit. I didn't shed a single tear. Before I tell you what I did next, if you've ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member just to protect your own sanity, drop a 1 in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know I'm not the only one fighting this battle. I didn't say a word to him. I just turned on my heel. I walked down the long hallway, my boots heavy on the imported rugs. I shoved the massive front doors open. The cold wind ripped through my thin shirt. I walked straight down the driveway, leaving the iron gates of the Mayer estate behind me, and stepped into a torrential DC downpour. I had $0 in my checking account. I had nowhere to sleep. The rain was freezing against my burning cheek. But as the storm swallowed me whole, I took my first real breath. The DC storm did not care that I was 18 and homeless. Rain drove sideways across the empty streets, stinging my cheeks like shattered glass. My thin cotton jacket was plastered to my ribs. Cold water pooled inside my boots with every step. I walked for hours, putting the Potomac River between me and my father's mahogany-paneled office. I kept my back straight, eyes locked on the horizon. My jaw ached from clenching it. I ended up in a forgotten quiet strip of Alexandria, Virginia. The streetlights flickered, casting a sickly yellow glare over the wet pavement. That was when I saw the sign hanging off a rusted iron bracket. Mayer's Tomes and Tales. Mayer. My boots squished on the concrete as I pushed the heavy oak door open. A brass bell chimed overhead. The air inside hit me like a physical wall. It smelled like decaying paper-dry leather bindings and heavy dust. A man stepped out from the shadows behind the wooden counter. My breath hitched in my throat. I froze, my hand still gripping the wet brass door handle. He wore a faded tweed jacket, the elbows patched with dark brown leather. His hair was gray, and the lines carved around his mouth were deep and exhausted. But the pale blue eyes were unmistakable. I was 10 years old the last time I saw that face. My mother had ripped a family photograph right down the middle, throwing his half into the fireplace. Daniel Mayer, my father's younger brother, the ghost of the family. He didn't ask for my ID. He didn't ask why I looked like a drowned rat shivering in a puddle on his floorboards. He just turned, walked into the back room, and returned with a frayed olive drab wool blanket. He draped it heavy over my shaking shoulders. Then he handed me a chipped ceramic mug. Hot chocolate. The heat seeped through the thick walls of the mug, burning into my freezing, numb palms. I gripped it tight. I sat on a wooden stool, surrounded by towering, precarious stacks of used books. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was not the suffocating, toxic silence of the Chevy Chase Country Club. It was safe. The dam broke. I did not cry. I do not cry. But I talked. I told him everything. The enlistment papers, the blinding slap across my face, the science trophy treated like garbage, the constant grinding pressure to be a silent, decorative prop in Richard Mayer's political circus. Daniel just listened. He leaned his weight against the front counter, arms crossed over his chest. When I finally ran out of breath, the silence returned. He looked at me. There was absolutely no pity in his eyes, just cold, hard recognition. "You have a brilliant mind, Nola," he said. His voice was quiet, rough like heavy grit sandpaper. "Richard hates what he cannot control, and he can never control a mind like yours." My chest tightened. The air left my lungs. It was the first time in 18 years someone acknowledged me as a living, breathing human being. Not a political tool. Not a defective product. Just Nola. That night, sitting among the moldering books, the velvet curtain fell on my family's pristine image. Daniel did not sugarcoat the past. 30 years ago, he and my father built a commercial real estate firm from the ground up. Sweat equity, long nights, pouring concrete and reading blueprints. Then Richard got his first taste of local political leverage. He wanted to rezone a low-income neighborhood. He wanted to bulldoze the whole grid, evict the working-class families, and throw up luxury condos for his wealthy donors. He wanted to squeeze the people who could not fight back. Daniel refused. He drew a hard line in the dirt. So, Richard broke him. My father found a buried legal loophole in their operating agreement. He hired a shark law firm out of New York and systematically bled his own brother dry. He locked Daniel out of the corporate bank accounts. He seized the hard assets. He kicked him to the curb with $0 to his name. Then Richard deployed his PR machine. He painted Daniel as a drunk, a liability, a loser who couldn't handle the pressure of big business. My father assassinated his own brother's character to hide a white-collar robbery. I sat there on the stool, the scratchy wool blanket biting into my neck, staring at the dust motes dancing under the yellow lamp. A sickening shiver ran down my spine. I realized I was not just escaping a strict, demanding father. I was running from a monster. A predator who cannibalized his own blood for a bump in the polls and a fatter bank account. I slept on a lumpy canvas cot in the back storage room. The next morning, cold reality hit. I needed to get to the Army Recruitment Center to finalize my paperwork. I had an old beat-up Honda Civic parked 3 blocks away, a rusted junker I bought with summer job cash. I threw my canvas bag into the passenger seat and turned the key. The engine coughed violently. A thick cloud of black exhaust vomited out of the tailpipe. Then a harsh metallic clank echoed under the hood. The engine died. Dead weight. I walked back into the bookshop, frustration boiling hot in my gut. I did not have a single dime for a mechanic. Daniel took one look at my face. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just reached behind the counter and pulled out a heavy black rotary dial phone. He spun the plastic dial with a thick finger. Shh, tick, shh, tick. "I know a guy," Daniel said, holding the heavy receiver to his ear. "A good mechanic around here, works cheap, hates politicians." He rattled off the street intersection and slammed the receiver down. I stood out on the wet concrete curb, my arms crossed tight across my chest, waiting. The air was thick with morning fog and the sharp smell of wet asphalt. 20 minutes later, the low, angry rumble of a massive diesel engine shook the street. A heavy flatbed tow truck rounded the corner hard. The massive tires threw dirty puddle water onto the sidewalk. The brakes screeched a high, deafening squeal of metal grinding on metal as the heavy rig slammed to a violent halt just inches from my boots. The heavy door of the flatbed tow truck groaned open. A pair of heavy steel-toe boots hit the wet pavement with a solid thud. Ethan didn't wear Italian wool or imported silk. He wore dark blue coveralls. The heavy canvas was stiff-stained dark at the knees with dried motor oil and transmission fluid. He didn't strut like the politicians in my father's circle. He just walked over his shoulders, wide the freezing Virginia rain rolling off his jaw. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't do the quick calculating scan that DC men do. He didn't check my clothes to see what brand I wore or size up my body. His dark eyes locked straight onto my face. He stared right at the heavy bruised bags under my eyes and the rigid line of my jaw. "You look like you're carrying the whole damn world on your shoulders," he said. His voice was a low, steady rumble over the sound of the idling diesel engine. There was zero pity in his tone, no fake polite small talk, just a flat, dead-on read. He dismantled the 10-foot concrete wall I'd built around myself in exactly 10 seconds. Our first date wasn't at a 5-star steakhouse. It was right there in the third bay of his auto shop, surrounded by stripped engine blocks and heavy tire racks. We sat opposite each other on 2 overturned plastic milk crates. Between us was a rusted half-oil drum filled with glowing charcoal. The smell of cheap ground beef and sizzling animal fat mixed heavily with the sharp chemical scent of WD-40 and brake cleaner. He flipped a burger with a greasy spatula. He talked, but he didn't talk about polling data stock portfolios or who knew who on Capitol Hill. He talked about torque, gear ratios, the firing order of an old V8 engine. I sat there eating a slightly burnt burger off a flimsy paper plate. I was 18. I was effectively an orphan. My bank account balance was an absolute zero. My father had just branded me a low-class failure. But sitting in that drafty concrete box, breathing in the smell of heavy exhaust and sweat, I felt my spine relax. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't a pawn on a chessboard. Ethan loved a broke runaway girl with absolutely nothing to offer but herself. That dirty, greasy garage was safer than any gated mansion in Chevy Chase. I enlisted. Basic training was a joke compared to surviving my father's dinner table. Then came the deployments. Kandahar. The air was thin, freezing at night, and choked with fine brown moon dust. I stood watch in plywood guard towers, gripping my M4, scanning the black horizon for movement. The elite politicians back home treated soldiers like cheap PR props. I was out there in the dirt, just trying to keep my guys breathing. The only thing that kept me tethered to sanity was the mail. Ethan's letters didn't have gold-embossed DC letterhead. They were written in black pen on cheap-lined notebook paper. He didn't write fake patriotic praise. He wrote about replacing a blown head gasket on a '98 Chevy. He wrote about the stray mutt he started feeding out by the dumpsters. Every single page had a black smudged thumbprint of axle grease in the corner. Those greasy thumbprints were my oxygen. They kept my lungs expanding. We built a fortress. A life completely separated from the toxic rot of my blood relatives. I did. My time took my honorable discharge and came home to him. We built the shop. We built a life. A real one. Which brings us to the present. 3 weeks after the chapel. 3 weeks after my mother called to cancel on my wedding because the groom was a grease monkey. 3 weeks of absolute dead silence after I dropped that photo of Uncle Daniel into the family chat. It was a Tuesday morning. The North Carolina heat was already baking the concrete outside. I was standing by the battered coffee maker in the corner of the shop bay. Ethan was flat on his back on a creeper under the hydraulic lift, wrestling with a rusted exhaust manifold on a Ford F-150. The shop radio was buzzing with low static and classic rock. Everything was completely perfectly quiet, secure. Then the perimeter broke. I heard it before I saw it. The distinct heavy crunch of expensive rubber crushing loose gravel. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Not a customer looking for a cheap oil change. It was a prowl. I set my coffee mug down on the metal workbench. My shoulders squared automatically. The military conditioning kicked in. I stepped out of the shadow of the garage bay and scanned the dirt lot. A glossy black Mercedes S-Class idled in the center of the driveway. The paint was so spotless it reflected the rusted, corrugated metal of our roof. It looked like a spaceship that had crash-landed in a junkyard. The heavy luxury doors swung open. A white pointed stiletto heel stepped out, hesitating for a fraction of a second before the sharp point pierced the dirty gravel. Claire. My sister stepped out of the driver's seat. She wore a pristine white silk blouse and tailored beige slacks. She looked exactly like the golden child she was raised to be. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, completely immune to the sticky southern humidity. She didn't look at me first. She looked around the lot. She looked at the stacks of used tires, the dark oil stains baking into the concrete, the rusted scrap metal piled by the chain-link fence. Her nose wrinkled. Her upper lip curled back in a sneer of pure, unfiltered disgust. A heavy, suffocating wave of expensive floral perfume cut straight through the smell of motor oil and burnt coffee. She looked at my home like it was an infectious disease. My jaw locked. The cold, familiar ice flooded my veins. The nightmare from DC didn't just call this time. It had driven right up to my front door. The heavy reinforced door of the Mercedes S-Class clicked open. It sounded like a bank vault unsealing. A pointed white stiletto pierced the dirty gravel of our lot. Claire stepped out. She looked entirely ridiculous. She wore a pristine white silk blouse and tailored beige slacks. She stood by the open car door for a second, her eyes scanning the ground, calculating her route. Then she began to tiptoe around the dark, baked-in oil slicks like she was navigating an active minefield. The North Carolina heat slapped her right in the face, heavy and wet, but her blonde blowout did not move an inch. She carried a massive wicker gift basket wrapped in thick, clear cellophane. It was stuffed with imported artisan cheeses, jars of fancy preserves, and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my first car. She marched up to the open bay door, her nose wrinkling at the smell of exhaust, and dropped the basket right onto Ethan's welding table. The cellophane crinkled violently against the sharp, black metal slag. She plastered a stiff, industrial-grade smile onto her face. It did not reach her eyes. It never did. "Nola," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Mom and Dad sent me." I did not move. I stayed right where I was, leaning my weight against the heavy metal track of the rolling bay door. I kept my arms crossed tight over my chest. I did not offer her a bottle of cold water. I did not invite her into the air-conditioned office. I did not even say hello. I just watched her. I shifted into the mindset of a military interrogator tracking her baseline behaviors. Her breathing was shallow. Her shoulders were rigid. My silence made her twitch. Claire cleared her throat and launched into her rehearsed script. It sounded exactly like one of our father's press briefings. "They regret missing the wedding," she recited. Her eyes darted nervously to the rusted tools hanging on the pegboard. It was a massive misunderstanding. Emotions were running high on all sides. But Dad wants to make things right. He's hosting a private, intimate dinner at the house this Friday. He wants you there. He even said to bring Uncle Daniel. She paused, waiting for me to break down in tears of gratitude. I just stared at her. She swallowed hard and kept pushing. "It is time we align our mutual interests, Nola. It is about combining our strengths, moving forward together as a united front." I listened to the words. Mutual interests, combining strengths, united front. She did not say, "I am sorry." She did not say, "They miss you." She did not ask how I was doing. She spoke pure, unadulterated corporate strategy. She was a shark in a white silk blouse. My family had smelled blood in the water. I just needed to figure out whose blood it was. The sharp clank of heavy metal hitting solid concrete broke the tension. Ethan slid out from under the lifted Ford F-150 on his wooden creeper. He sat up, wiping a thick streak of black grease off his forehead with the back of his wrist. He dropped a heavy half-inch wrench onto the floor. He stood up, wiping his hands on a dirty red shop rag, and walked over to us. "You must be Claire," Ethan said. His voice was deep, calm, and completely unfazed by the luxury car idling in his dirt lot. He extended his right hand. Claire looked at his hand like he was holding a live hand grenade. She stared at the black grease embedded deep under his fingernails and the thick calluses on his palms. She forced her arm forward and let her fingertips brush against his for a fraction of a second. She yanked her hand back instantly, as if the contact burned her skin. Then she did it. She thought I was not looking. She subtly wiped her fingertips down the side of her white silk slacks, trying to rub off the phantom dirt. My jaw locked. The cold, familiar ice flooded my veins. To my sister, the man who had kept me breathing in Kandahar, the man who built this business with his own 2 hands, was not a human being. He was a disease. A low-class infection she had to wash off before it ruined her designer clothes. Ethan did not care. He did not show an ounce of offense. He just tossed the dirty rag onto a workbench, picked up his chipped coffee mug, and leaned against the red metal toolbox. I looked straight at Claire. I deployed the one weapon she absolutely could not handle. Dead, suffocating radio silence. 10 seconds passed. Only the loud rhythmic hum of the industrial shop fan filled the empty space. I did not blink. I kept my eyes locked onto hers, letting the heavy, uncomfortable silence press down on her shoulders. Claire shifted her weight from one stiletto to the other. Her plastic smile began to violently crack. The DC elite are trained to debate, to argue, to spin words into webs. They do not know how to handle a soldier's absolute silence. The pressure cooked her from the inside out. "Look, Nola," she snapped, her voice completely losing the fake sweetness. The ugly, spoiled brat finally clawed her way to the surface. "Do not make this difficult. Just show up on Friday. Dad is losing his mind over this. You know exactly how he gets. He absolutely cannot stand the thought of letting an outsider run something so important completely out of his control." She stopped dead. Her eyes went wide, the color completely drained from her face, leaving her pale and terrified. She clamped her mouth shut, her teeth clicking together audibly. Letting an outsider run something so important. I did not move a single muscle. I processed the words like incoming enemy coordinates. My father did not want me back. My father did not suddenly care about Uncle Daniel. My father did not even care about the wedding photo. He cared about something being out of his control. Something big, something run by an outsider. Claire knew she had just dropped a live explosive. She spun around, nearly twisting her ankle on the gravel, and practically sprinted back to the Mercedes. She yanked the heavy door open, threw herself inside the leather interior, and slammed it shut. The massive tires spun, kicking up a thick cloud of gray dust and loose rocks as the car tore out of the lot, desperate to escape. I did not watch her leave. The sound of the engine faded down the highway. I stood perfectly still. I turned my head very slowly. I locked my eyes onto Ethan. He was still leaning against the red metal toolbox. He was taking a slow, measured sip of his black coffee. I stared at his hands, the rough, calloused hands of a mechanic. The hands that smelled like WD-40 cheap soap and exhaust. An outsider running something important. My eyes traveled from his heavy, grease-stained steel toe boots up the dirty blue coveralls all the way to his calm, dark eyes. He was not looking at the dirt road where Claire had just disappeared. He was looking right back at me. He did not look confused. He did not look surprised by what she had said. He looked exactly like a man who knew the ambush was coming. The dust from the tires of the Mercedes was still hanging in the humid North Carolina air. I did not watch the car disappear down the highway. I spun around. My boots dug into the dirt. I locked my eyes straight onto Ethan. The quiet, supportive wife was gone. The sergeant took over. "What are you hiding?" I asked. My voice did not shake. It was a flat, direct command. What the hell was Claire talking about? Ethan looked at me. He did not flinch. He did not try to laugh it off or feed me a line of garbage. He just held my stare. Slowly, he opened his hand and let the heavy half-inch steel wrench fall. It hit the solid concrete floor with a loud, sharp clank that echoed off the corrugated metal walls. The sound signaled the end of the act. He wiped his dirty hands on his coveralls. He reached deep into a hidden chest pocket and pulled out a sleek, matte black keycard. There was no logo on it. "Follow me," he said. He turned and walked toward the very back of the shop. I followed his heavy steel toe boots, past the toolboxes, past the rusted engine blocks, all the way to a corner I rarely paid attention to. It was a blank, corrugated metal door. For 3 years, I thought it was just the storage closet for dry rot tires and empty oil drums. Ethan stepped up to the wall next to the door. He pressed his grease-stained thumb against a hidden panel. A small black scanner slid open. He swiped the card. A sharp electronic beep pierced the air. The door did not swing on rusted hinges. It hissed. Heavy reinforced steel glided silently along a hidden track. Cold, climate-controlled air blasted out, hitting my face and instantly wiping away the smell of cheap coffee and motor oil. It smelled like static electricity, like ozone and cold copper. I stepped inside. The door slid shut behind me, completely cutting off the sound of the shop radio. I was standing in a sterile white room. The floor was coated in anti-static epoxy. Row after row of black server racks lined the walls, their cooling fans generating a low, relentless hum. Glaring blue LED lights blinked rapidly in the dark. In the absolute center of the room sat a massive polished titanium cylinder wired into a diagnostic grid. It was a prototype. The air around it literally vibrated with contained power. I stood frozen. I looked at the man in the dirty blue coveralls standing under the surgical white lights. "This is headquarters," Ethan said. His voice was calm. "My name is Ethan Carter. This is EC Technologies." EC Technologies. The name hit my brain like a sledgehammer swinging full force into concrete. I am a soldier. I read the defense procurement briefings. I knew exactly what EC Tech was. They were the ghost unicorn, a faceless private tech startup that just completely blindsided the defense industry. 2 months ago, they snatched $1 billion tactical power grid contract straight out of the Pentagon. They beat out the massive, deeply entrenched defense contractors. Contractors heavily backed by the DC political elite. Contractors backed by Senator Richard Mayer. I stared at Ethan, the man who ate burnt burgers off a metal barrel with me. The man who sent me letters smeared with axle grease while I was freezing in Kandahar. My mechanic had just financially gutted my father's entire political faction. Suddenly, every single piece of the puzzle snapped violently into place. The photo I sent of Uncle Daniel and Ethan. The immediate frantic phone calls from my mother. The massive gift basket. Claire showing up in her silk blouse to play nice. Claire screaming about Dad losing his mind over an outsider running something important. It was never about me. My chest went completely hollow, but it did not collapse. My father did not want his daughter back. He did not feel a single ounce of guilt for ignoring my wedding. He only wanted the man I married. He wanted to absorb EC Tech. He wanted to fold Ethan's company into his corrupt, bloated portfolio and take the Pentagon contract back. I was nothing but a convenient backdoor, a Trojan horse to be used and discarded. Any lingering, pathetic hope that my family actually loved me evaporated in that cold, humming server room. The pain of being used burned away instantly. What replaced it was a cold, suffocating, absolute rage, a killer's clarity. Ethan watched my face. He saw the shift. "I have the capital to fight him in court," Ethan said quietly. "We do not have to go to that dinner, Nola. We can shut them out. Completely." I looked at the blue lights reflecting in Ethan's eyes. He had played the part of a broke mechanic just to make sure I felt safe. He hid his empire because he knew I was terrified of being used for money again. He loved me for exactly who I was. And my father wanted to rip this man apart for profit. If you have ever realized that a toxic family member only reached out to you because they wanted something you had, drop the word truth in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because what I did next changed everything. I turned my back on the servers and walked over to Ethan. I reached out and took his rough, calloused hand in mine. I squeezed his fingers tight. My heartbeat was steady, 60 beats a minute. The absolute calm before a sniper takes the shot. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "We are not hiding." I looked straight at the heavy steel door. "I will accept his invitation to dinner," I said, pronouncing every single word with absolute precision. "But we are not going to Chevy Chase to make peace. We are going there to finish him." I turned on my heel, swiped the panel, and walked out of the room. It was time to load the gun. The heavy mud terrain tires of Ethan's Ford F250 whined against the asphalt of Interstate 95. We were heading straight north, straight into the belly of the beast. There were 3 of us in the cab. Ethan was behind the wheel. Uncle Daniel sat in the back, quiet, looking out the tinted window at the passing tree line. I sat shotgun. The radio was dead in the dashboard. Nobody was listening to music. Nobody was talking about a happy family reunion. We were a 3-man squad moving deep behind enemy lines. The tension in the cab was thick enough to cut with a combat knife. "He's going to corner you first," Daniel said, his rough voice breaking the silence. Richard never attacks the main target right away. He will try to isolate you, Ethan, make you feel out of your depth. Let him try, Ethan said. He did not take his eyes off the road. His hands were relaxed on the steering wheel, but the veins in his forearms were corded tight. We were not bringing a casserole to this dinner. We were bringing a ticking time bomb. My mother had sent me a frantic text the day before, a strict dress code. Business formal Nola, please do not embarrass us. She wanted me wrapped in silk and draped in designer labels. She wanted me to play the part of the compliant, wealthy politician's daughter. I refused. I looked down at myself. I wore a dark charcoal wool sweater, flat front black trousers, and flat leather Oxfords. No jewelry, no makeup, no expensive armor to hide behind. I sat with my spine completely rigid against the truck seat. I did not need $1,000 dress to command a room. The discipline of an airborne soldier was the only armor I needed. I was not going to beg for their respect by wearing their uniform. I was going to force them to respect mine. The heavy traffic of I-95 thinned out as we took the exit toward D.C. The truck rumbled into Georgetown. The air outside the window immediately felt colder, stiff. The sprawling red brick townhouses loomed on either side of the narrow streets. Thick, green ivy crawled up the expensive masonry. I watched the perfectly manicured lawns roll by. The grass was cut so razor-sharp it looked completely unnatural. When I was a kid, I thought these houses were castles. Now scanning the neighborhood with a soldier's eye, I saw them for exactly what they were: heavily decorated tombs. Expensive boxes designed to bury the rot and corruption festering inside. "We are 2 blocks out," Ethan said. I checked my pulse against my wrist. 60 beats a minute, steady, cold. The 18-year-old girl who ran crying into the rain was dead. She had been replaced by a ghost with a sniper's focus. I was not afraid of Richard Mayer anymore. I was hunting him. The truck slowed down and pulled up to the curb. Number 402. The massive iron gate was wide open, practically begging us to drive in. Ethan cut the engine. The sudden silence in the cab was deafening. He turned to me, the dark shadow of his jaw set hard. He unbuckled his seatbelt. The heavy metal latch clicked loud in the quiet truck. "We do this your way," Ethan said. I nodded once. We opened the doors and stepped out into the freezing DC air. Daniel stood on the sidewalk, adjusting the collar of his worn tweed jacket. He looked up at the massive 3-story house that his own brother bought with stolen money. His pale blue eyes were completely unreadable. "Ready, Uncle Dan?" I asked. "I have been ready for 30 years. "Nola," he replied. We walked up the long slate stone driveway together. The sound of our boots crunched heavily against the gravel. We climbed the wide granite steps to the front porch. Before I could even raise my hand to ring the doorbell, the heavy brass latch clicked. The massive carved oak door swung open. The heavy metal hinges groaned. Senator Richard Mayer stood in the doorway. He was not wearing his aggressive Washington power suit. He was dressed in a soft navy blue cashmere sweater and tailored slacks. The smell of expensive scotch and heavy cologne rolled out of the foyer, hitting me right in the face. He looked at me. Then he looked at Ethan. Finally, his eyes snapped to Daniel. For a fraction of a second, just a microscopic twitch of the muscle under his left eye, the mask slipped. I saw the flash of pure, terrified panic. But he was a career politician. He recovered in less than a heartbeat. He stretched his arms out wide, stretching his mouth into the warmest, most sickeningly fake smile I had ever seen. "Nola, my girl," he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the foyer. "Welcome home." I did not smile back. I did not step into his embrace. I just locked my eyes dead onto his, recording the desperate, ugly lie twitching right beneath his expensive skin. Ethan reached down and wrapped his large, calloused hand tightly around mine. I took a deep breath of the cold air, stepped over the threshold, and walked straight into the kill zone. The massive crystal chandelier hanging over the dining table threw blinding, sharp light onto the fine bone china. We sat in the formal dining room. The room smelled like roasted garlic, expensive red wine, and heavy unspoken tension. My mother sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, playing with a heavy string of pearls around her neck. Claire sat across from me, poking at a piece of asparagus. Daniel sat completely silent to my right. And then there was my father. Senator Richard Mayer cut his prime rib with smooth, practiced motions. The heavy silver knife scraped against the porcelain. A grating, high-pitched screech. He chewed slowly, washing the meat down with a sip of Cabernet. Then he started firing. "Your military career, Nola," he said, dabbing his mouth with a crisp linen napkin. "Noble, I suppose. But where does it actually lead? Crawling in the dirt does not build a portfolio." He smiled. A cold, flat stretch of his lips. He was intentionally stomping all over the years I spent dodging mortar fire in Kandahar. I picked up my fork. I chewed a piece of $70 prime rib. It tasted like absolutely nothing. I did not break eye contact. I did not flinch. He shifted his sights. He looked at Ethan. "And Ethan," Richard said, leaning back in his heavy wooden chair. "It is truly amazing how a little bit of networking can completely change a mechanic's life overnight. Funny how things just fall into your lap when you marry the right name." Ethan did not grip his fork tight. He did not get defensive. He just picked up his water glass, took a slow, calm sip, and offered my father a faint, knowing smile. The kind of smile you give a dog barking behind a locked gate. "Delicious beef, Richard," Ethan said, flat, unbothered. My father's jaw tightened. When the plates were cleared, the real trap was sprung. Richard stood up, buttoning his cashmere sweater. "Ethan, Nola, my office, now." We followed him down the hall. I knew this room. I knew the smell of the leather chairs and the heavy oak paneling. This was the exact spot where he slapped me so hard I tasted copper. Richard walked around his massive mahogany desk. He did not sit. He leaned forward, planting both hands flat on the wood. The polite politician vanished. The predator took over. "Let's cut the bullshit," Richard said, his voice dropping into a hard, gravelly register. "You pulled a fast one on the Pentagon, Ethan. Congratulations. But EC Tech is a startup. You are swimming with sharks now. You need political armor, and I have it. You merge your operations with my back-end defense shell company. You bring the tech. I supply the clearance and the Hill backing." It was a blatant daylight robbery. He wanted to swallow Ethan's company whole. Ethan stood with his hands in his pockets. He looked at the senator the same way he looked at a rusted, stripped-out transmission. "I built my company to break up the bureaucratic monopoly you spent 30 years protecting," Ethan said. His voice was dead calm. "I do not need your armor. I am the artillery. The answer is no." The word hung in the air. No. It was a foreign language to Richard Mayer. No one said no to him. The polite, saintly mask completely shattered. His face turned a deep, blotchy purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He slammed his open palm down on the mahogany desk. Bang! The heavy wood rattled. He pointed a shaking, rigid finger straight at my face. "You!" he roared. Spit flew from his lips. "You ungrateful, rebellious bitch. You always ruin everything. You bring this arrogant grease monkey into my house and think you can dictate terms to me." Behind us, the office door clicked open. My mother stood there, her mouth hanging open in shock, her hand clutching her pearls. Claire peeked over her shoulder, completely frozen. The heat inside my chest hit a flashpoint. I did not cry. I did not shrink back. The pressure inside me crystallized, turning instantly into jagged, freezing ice. I stepped forward. I closed the distance until I was standing right across the desk from him. I did not yell. I dropped my voice into a low, lethal cadence. "No, Senator," I said, stripping away the title of father permanently. "You are the one who ruins things. You destroy everything you cannot control." His breath hitched. He tried to speak, but I cut him off. I turned my head slightly, pointing a single rigid finger at my mother standing in the doorway. She flinched, shrinking back against the doorframe. "And you," I said. My words hit her like physical blows. "You sat at your vanity. You heard the thick leather belt hit my skin in this exact room. But you chose the country club. You chose the pearls over your own daughter. Your silence was infinitely worse than his fists." My mother let out a small, pathetic gasp. Tears spilled over her expensive mascara. I felt absolutely nothing for her. I turned back to Richard. He was gripping the edge of the desk, breathing heavy, staring at me like I was a stranger. Because I was. The scared little girl he used to beat was dead. A soldier was standing in her place, and I had just ordered a total scorched earth airstrike on his entire reality. "Do not ever contact me again," I said. I turned my back on him. I did not wait for a response. I walked over to Ethan. I grabbed his rough, oil-stained hand and gripped it hard. "We are leaving," I said. We walked past my mother, past my sister, and out the front door. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the carved oak door. I pulled it shut behind us with all my strength. Slam! The sound cracked like a gunshot through the freezing Georgetown night. We drove back to Fayetteville in total silence. I did not need to talk about what just happened. The mission was executed. The target was neutralized. The minute I walked through the front door of our house, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened my contacts. I blocked Richard Mayer. I blocked Eleanor Mayer. I blocked the PR team, the assistants, and every single DC number that had ever flashed on my screen. I built a digital steel wall. Total lockdown. I did not want an apology. I did not want an explanation. I just wanted them gone. 3 weeks later, the first domino finally tipped over. I was sitting at the kitchen island drinking black coffee. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up with a bold black headline across the front page of Politico. Pentagon favors defense tech startup. Senator Mayer's faction loses critical ground. I read the article. It was a bloodbath. Ethan's company, EC Tech, had officially secured the grid contract. My father's shadow company, the bloated defense contractor he spent a decade padding with taxpayer money, was completely locked out. The corporate donors smelled the weakness. They panicked. They started pulling their funding, bailing out of Richard's super PACs like rats abandoning a sinking cargo ship. The mighty DC empire was starting to crack. The next day, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number with a Maryland area code. I answered it. Nola. It was Claire. She sounded completely unhinged. The thick, confident layer of arrogance was gone. She was hyperventilating, choking on her own tears. The Harrison family canceled the wedding. Claire sobbed, her voice high and desperate. His father called Dad this morning. They said our family is too much of a political liability right now. They backed out. It is all ruined. Nola, everything is falling apart, and it is all your fault. I held the phone to my ear. I listened to the golden child completely break down. The Harrisons were DC royalty. Her marriage was never about love. It was a calculated corporate merger designed to consolidate power. And just like any bad investment, the second the stock crashed, the investors pulled out. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not offer her a shoulder to cry on. "I will help you find a job, Claire," I said. My voice was completely flat. "But I will not fix this. Do not try to soothe them. Do not try to fix his mess. You either learn how to swim on your own, or you drown with them." "You are a monster," she screamed into the receiver. I hung up. She needed to figure out how to survive without a silk parachute. A month later, the real bomb detonated. It was a Sunday morning. The Washington Post dropped a massive investigative piece that hit the political circuit like a shockwave. The title took up the entire top half of the screen. The Mayer Deception. 30 years of forgery, fraud, and stolen assets. A team of investigative journalists had spent weeks digging through decades of sealed court documents and financial records. They found the paper trail. They found the exact illegal legal loopholes and forged signatures Richard Mayer used to steal the real estate company from Uncle Daniel 30 years ago. The white-collar crime of the decade was suddenly front-page news. My father was exposed, not just as a failing politician, but as a ruthless, calculating thief who cannibalized his own brother for a profit. By noon, the phone on our kitchen wall started ringing. The loud, shrill bell cut through the quiet house. Then Ethan's cell phone started buzzing on the counter. Then mine. It was the press. CNN, Fox, independent journalists, local news stations. They were bloodhounds, and they had caught the scent. They wanted a quote from the estranged daughter. They wanted me to go on camera and twist the knife. Ethan walked into the kitchen holding a greasy shop rag. He looked at the landline ringing on the wall. He walked over, grabbed the thick plastic cord, and yanked it hard. Click. The ringing stopped dead. He tossed the dead cord onto the counter. "Bacon and eggs," he asked. Yeah, I said. 2 eggs. Over easy. We ate breakfast in total silence. We did not answer a single call. We did not issue a statement. We did not need to. Our absolute dead silence was the most brutal confirmation the press could ever ask for. By Tuesday, the Senate Ethics Committee formally opened a massive investigation into Richard Mayer's finances. The walls were closing in fast. I watched the live broadcast on the small TV in Ethan's garage. My father stood behind a podium, surrounded by a swarm of reporters. The camera flashes strobed violently, lighting up his face. He looked absolutely pathetic. His skin was gray and sallow. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His custom suit hung loose on his shoulders. He leaned into the microphone. His voice, once a booming weapon of authority, was weak and trembling. Effective immediately, he read from a prepared statement, avoiding the camera lenses. I am stepping down from my position in the Senate. I need to spend this time focusing on my family and my health. A final desperate lie. He did not have a family left to focus on. His bank accounts were frozen by federal investigators. Civil lawsuits were circling his estate like vultures picking at a fresh carcass. The pristine, untouchable portrait of the Mayer family was completely shredded. I reached out and pressed the power button on the TV. The screen went black. The sound of the reporters shouting questions vanished, replaced by the low hum of the garage fan. It was over. I walked out of the shop and down the gravel driveway toward the house. The North Carolina air felt clean. I checked the heavy metal mailbox at the end of the road. It was mostly junk mail and flyers for local hardware stores, but buried at the bottom was a thick, cream-colored envelope. There was no return address. Just my name, written in shaky, barely legible cursive. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my mother. I stood in the dirt road holding the expensive paper. The final test had arrived. I ripped open the cream-colored envelope right there in the dirt of my driveway. 3 lines. Shaky, uneven black ink. I was wrong. I understand if you never want to look at me again. I did not invite her to my home. That was a secure perimeter. I texted her an address for a rundown diner out on Highway 301, neutral territory. I sat in a cracked red vinyl booth. The place smelled heavily of burnt coffee, old grease, and cheap bleach. The bell over the glass door jingled. I barely recognized her when she walked in. The untouchable DC socialite was completely gone. No tailored designer blazer. No perfectly dyed hair. A thick inch of gray roots showed at her part, and her neck was bare. The heavy string of pearls was gone. She slid into the booth across from me. Her hands shook slightly as she placed them on the sticky laminate table. She looked down. Nola, I am so... I held up my hand. She stopped instantly. The silence in the diner was broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator case. I forgive you, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any lingering anger. But I'm not doing this to make you feel better. I'm doing it for my own peace of mind. Things do not go back to normal. We are not playing a happy family for the cameras anymore. No acting. Just the absolute truth. You crossed my boundaries, and I cut the cord permanently. She didn't argue. She didn't try to manipulate the situation or cry fake tears. She just gave a slow, heavy nod. She accepted the terms of surrender. 5 years later. The living room floor was a complete minefield of sharp plastic. Sam, my 4-year-old son, sat dead center on the rug. His face was bright red. He slammed a green Lego brick against a blue base plate, trying to force a fit that just wasn't there. The pieces shattered apart, clattering hard and loud against the hardwood floor. Sam's tiny hands balled into tight fists. He squeezed his eyes shut. Stupid! He yelled, his voice cracking. I am stupid. A cold electric shock hit the back of my neck. You are a delusional, low-class disappointment. My father's roar echoed in the back of my skull. The phantom sting of the heavy leather belt flared on my skin. The smell of his expensive scotch filled my nose. The military conditioning kicked in automatically. My spine snapped straight. My jaw locked tight. The cycle of the Mayer family abuse was staring right at me from my own living room rug. It wanted to infect my son. I took a slow, deep breath. I pushed the ghost of Richard Mayer back into the dirt where he belonged. I walked over. I didn't yell. I didn't loom over him like a giant shadow. I dropped down to my knees on the hard floor, bringing my eyes dead level with his. "You are not stupid, Sam," I said quietly. I reached out and covered his small tense fist with my calloused hand. "It is just a little complicated. The pieces do not always fit the first time. Let me help you." Sam opened his eyes. He looked at me, his chest heaving. He took a shaky breath, and his tiny fingers slowly uncurled. The heavy tension bled completely out of the room. I felt his small warm hand grip my thumb tight. Right there on the floor, the generational trauma broke. The chain snapped. It ended with me. I stood up and looked out the sliding glass door. The North Carolina sun was burning hot over the backyard. The heavy smell of hickory smoke and roasting meat hung in the thick summer air. It was loud, messy, perfect. Uncle Daniel sat in a cheap aluminum folding chair, laughing a deep, gravelly laugh as Sam ran out the back door and tackled his leg. My mother sat quietly on a wooden bench under the big oak tree, holding a sweating glass of iced tea. She looked older, smaller, but the suffocating toxic tension that used to choke the air around her was entirely gone. The screen door banged open. Claire walked out carrying a heavy plastic tray of hamburger buns. She wore faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. She had lost the DC trust fund. She lost the arranged corporate marriage. She had to take a job managing shifts at a local logistics warehouse. She looked exhausted, but the arrogant plastic sneer was totally wiped off her face. She was finally a real human being. And then there was Ethan. He stood over the rusted oil drum grill, flipping thick burgers with a metal spatula. The flames kicked up, illuminating his face. EC Tech was a certified giant now. He held massive defense contracts that made Washington insiders sweat. But right here, right now, he was just wearing a stained white t-shirt, dirty jeans, and heavy work boots. He caught me looking through the glass. He flashed me that same calm, steady smile. He was still my mechanic. We did not just survive the fallout of DC, we paved over it. Last year, EC Tech pulled a massive chunk of profit and quietly established a foundation, the Daniel Mayer Scholarship Fund. We took the ashes of my father's betrayal and used it to put working-class kids through engineering school. My father spent his entire miserable life preaching that optics were everything. That true power was who you knew what you wore and who you could control with fear. He was dead wrong. Power is not a corner office in Chevy Chase. Power is the absolute freedom to walk away from a toxic table. True power is building a fortress out of honesty, safety, and the people who would actually take a bullet for you. I am a soldier. For the first 18 years of my life, I fought on the wrong battlefield. I bled for people who only saw me as a political prop and a casualty of war. I opened the sliding glass door and stepped out into the blinding sun. The heavy blast of the BBQ smoke hit my face. My squad was all here. I looked at the life I built from absolute zero. I won. If my story helped you find your own strength, please like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.